G'day, this is Zenium Live, and I am Scotty North, and today I'm joined with Jason Stock. How you going, Jason?
Good, thanks, Scotty. How are you, mate?
I'm very good. So this is our monthly market update. Last year, I ran these like clockwork. It was like the second or third week of every month. I can't remember. I think it's the second week. And then come this year, mate, every time I go to do one, there's a whole bunch of new information or stuff coming out, and I keep putting it off, thinking, I'll find out what else we can do. So I thought, well, we better scrape one in before the end of June. Now, for those of you who you probably haven't seen Jason before, but you might recognise his voice because Jason kicked off our podcast 3 years ago with us, mate. And so this is the first time on the big live screen.
It
so
is.
made you a bit nervous?
As nervous as I get. So no.
That's good. That's excellent. So, mate, it's good to have you back. I've been wanting to get you back on here, but obviously with the whole, meeting together thing this year, we haven't been able to get in the studio. So I figured, stuff it. We'll just get you straight onto the live stream and go from there. So, have you got anything major to tell us since you last visited us?
No, not really, mate. Life has been incredibly busy, actually, but no. Too boring for most people want to hear.
Well, let's jump into the market.
I got divorced last week, mate.
Oh, you got divorced
I finally got divorced. Yeah, so
right.
There you go.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't even know how to comment on that, mate.
Yeah, exactly. That's all good.
That's okay. All right, so we'll jump into the market update. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to go and show you guys a reminder of what last month's property clock looked like. And there it is there. Now, I've got it in black and white, so when I flick screens, you can see it really easy. So this is last month, and I talked about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago on our update. And you can see there was quite a number of towns here on the rising market, a bit more than sort of normal, but there was a lot in the decline. And we're not going to go through that because that was last month's info, but I'll show you this month. And where are we? Up here. And there we go. So pretty much everything is on the left of the clock, right? And there's hardly anything on the right. So the only things that we've got for those listening to our Zenium Live podcast, on the right-hand side, we've got Bendigo, Southeast New South Wales and Sydney. And at the bottom of the clock, we have Alice Springs, Bundaberg, Darwin, Perth, Rockhampton, Toowoomba. So that's the bottom of the market. And then everything from starting a recovery, rising market, there's heaps, right? I'm not even going to read them out, but there's things like Cairns, Emerald, Gladstone, Hervey Bay, all that section in Queensland, Mildura, southwest WA, and then we've got the rising market, Barossa Valley, Ballarat, Albury, Adelaide, Gippsland, Hobart, Launceston, there's Mount Gambier, there's all those sections over there, right? And approaching peak of the market, we've got Bathurst, Gold Coast, Melbourne, Orange and Sunshine Coast. And top of the market is Central Coast, Coffs Harbour, Mid-North Coast and Newcastle. So that's what that data is telling us there. Now, remember, this is based on activity and other bits and pieces, but it's really, really interesting to see the difference between this month here, last month's clock in black and white, with all the bits and pieces. We've got Coffs Harbour, Illawarra on the decline, and then we go to this month's clock, and we've got Coffs Harbour at the peak of the market. So it moves all around over the place. At the moment, the data is just all over the place. We don't normally see that quicker activity on the HCW clock, although it can happen, but not in so many different locations. Jason, what do you reckon about that?
Yeah, that's a bit odd. And we've sort of somehow managed to jump 2 years, haven't we? I don't know how that works. But
mate, it's very interesting indeed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they analyse that and again effectively manage to jump properties from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Sorry, not properties, suburbs.
Yeah, well, that's right. So all it says to me is that we obviously had that massive slowdown, and there's been some sort of activity back into the market this month that they're starting to record, and it's just throwing all their normal sort of data processes out where you might sort of say, you go peak, decline, bottom, recovery and peak again. It's kind of just jumping all over the place. And I think that's what we're starting to see on this data, which is just really is volatility, right? I mean, it's inconsistent data. You don't know what you're pricing, all this sort of stuff. or there's some sort of major outside influence, which we've obviously seen through the COVID event, and then back into the market, which is the other topic we want to touch on today, is, the grants and things. I mean, this is the type of result you'd expect to see if there was a major outside influence, and we have seen that twofold on the way down, and potentially to escalate activity coming out the other side through these government grants. Mate, what is your take on these grants? I mean, give us the rundown, because you're the man on the ground dealing with, buyers and sellers every day as a real estate agent out there.
Yes.
You've seen some pretty amazing stuff where you're based, right?
Yeah. Well, and just I guess for confirmation for the viewers, like I'm obviously I actually work out of Nambour on the Sunshine Coast. So effectively, I mean, the first homeowners grant's been around for a while, but the trigger point was the new $25,000 grant to build a new home. So that's occurred 3 weeks ago now. I think it was first announced. And since then, land inquiry has just been absolutely ballistic and skyrocketed. Any available registered land on the Sunshine Coast got snapped up literally in the first weekend. I'm now selling blocks that are steep and been on the market for 3 years at full price with multiple offers. Unless you're an agent answering the phone, you just can't comprehend what's happened to the land inquiry in the last 2 or 3 weeks since it was announced.
So I heard some stories kicking around that it was announced on that Wednesday or Thursday, and by that first weekend, some of those whole estates had been sold out. I mean, is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So whole stages in developments and even stages that haven't been built yet, literally sold out that weekend. I believe there's one developer on the coast that sold 47 blocks in the 36 hours after the announcement was made. And then there's plenty of other stories of the similar result, just less numbers because they had less stock available.
Yeah, I got a text last night through a building mate, and he said that there's one estate that he knows of that sold pretty much everything left, like you just said, and there was another one that they've got names down on the list for 209 blocks.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's just unheard of, right?
Yes.
I mean, we haven't seen that since what? 02.
Yeah. 02 is probably about right too. So no, look, it's again, it's staggering. It's and if I hadn't been answering the phone, I would never have believed it.
So just let's touch on that, because let's drag in a picture on the screen here. I always like to bring in on our market updates, which is the lovely Phil Anderson's clock.
Yep.
So, I mean, I know that you follow his work as well. Now, this was dated a fair while ago, and he'd pegged this mid-cycle slowdown for somewhere in 19 or 20. Well, we can pretty much say we're seeing that.
Yep.
And then it goes from 21 to 24. We sort of get the next frantic sort of stage of activity. Now, it's an 18-and-a-half-year clock, right? So if we wind back from, say, when the peak of COVID was this year, the peak of the hype, right, was about March, and we took 18.5 years back from then. We were sort of back at that 2001 time. In fact, it takes us right back to September 11, the 2001.
It does.
Which is interesting. Let's just leave it at that point. I find it interesting that, well, in 2001, I mean, international travel changed forever from that point, and in March this year, it's changed forever again. So these cycles are, you don't have to necessarily believe in them, but sometimes you see data like that and you go, that's a bit coincidental. But that aside, that was the time then from 02 sort of onwards where we started to see, this type of hype and activity, and 02, 03, and things kind of went gangbusters. I mean, you were operating back then, weren't you?
Not as an agent. I was buying and selling personally back then. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And so what was going on?
Well, I can tell you, September 11 attacks happened in September 2001. Is that right? So my son was born in 2002. So in February 2002, I bought a house in Vaughan Avenue in Maroochydore for $105,000, and sold it 18 months later for $335,000. And also bought the Cullen Shopping Centre in about March, April of that year for $695,000, which I sold 12 or 18 months about 18 months later for $935,000. So property prices in that period just went absolutely nuts.
Mate, that's insane, right? So, like, I mean, we're not necessarily getting on here saying the same thing, but it's very interesting. You start seeing these repetition of catalysts for events, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
had we had things like the September 11, and then now we've got the COVID.
yeah,
So I guess what I'm saying is I remember people putting their name on waiting lists for land, right?
yeah,
And I remember there was a first homeowners grant introduced back
yeah.
around that '01 time, because I think somewhere back then I bought a house and I think I got like 7 grand or something, and I remember people having their names written on for land.
Yeah.
But mate, we're seeing exactly the same thing again, right? This is history repeating itself. Even though we're in it, we go, oh, it's happening, it's happening. But this, I can't get over these stories. This is people telling us the amount of land that's selling in these areas is off the charts.
Yep, absolutely it is. So
So,
like as you touched on, like I'm a believer in this 18.5 year land cycle as well. That we've sort of spoken about a few times since, and the mere fact that COVID's occurred this year has just confirmed Phil Anderson's research for me. Obviously you've got the property clock there, but I know that you'll have the other chart that I've got on my office wall at home too, and it was preempted that 2020 there was going to be panic in the markets, and again that chart was written in like 1934. So this COVID process and it's just been confirmation of the cycle for me, and then when you, like you said, you rewind back 18.5 years from here, it takes us straight back to September 11. And then knowing what happened from that point in 2001 through to what was it, March 2008 when the GFC finally hit. Gee whiz, anybody that plans well in the next 18 months can really set themselves up for a lifetime.
yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what goes on. We got Graham dropping in that I've just saying he couldn't read the clock, so I've made it as big as I sort of could to fit on the screen, Graham. But we might put a link to an article afterwards on our website, which has the clock there, and also Phil's website as well, which he's got there. But mate, Graham, thanks for dropping past. Appreciate letting us know. So Jason, I guess the thing is that this land, let's go back a step. There's all these guys signing on land. We've got the government grants. Just take us through how the grants work, mate.
Well, the new grant, which is what's triggered the onslaught, so to speak. The new grant is a $25,000 grant that anybody that builds a new owner-occupied residence. So you can't use it to build an investment property, but effectively anybody that buys or even if they previously owned a block of land, but they sign a building contract with a builder between now and December 31, and that builder can start within 3 months of the date of that contract signing. And then obviously subject to some income parameters and things like that for eligibility. There's the $25,000 grant, obviously there to stimulate the building industry.
Mate, so the way I look at it though, I mean, that's really good if you got land and you can get the builder on the job.
Yes.
But if you're buying land off the plan, I guess the builder, there's no way that they can start in time, or is that from settlement time of the land?
Yeah. Well, again, the risk is, you're right, if the land is not built already. So, I mean, if it's most of the way through the construction process, and i.e. it can be registered before December 31, so that you've got the ability for your builder to say do a soil test and then be willing to price and sign a contract with you, that's fine. But what my concern is, we're seeing a bit of a run on the land at the moment. And a lot of these stages are selling out off the plan, and people signing those contracts or signing those expressions of interest thinking that they're going to get the $25,000 grant. But again, if that land's not registered prior to December 31 and you can't sign a contract with a builder, then you're going to miss the boat on the $25,000. So that in itself is a bit of it's not a red flag, but it's something I'm really conscious of, is the idea that later in the year, I think a lot of property will come back onto the market. A lot of land will come back on the market because people can't or don't settle on it because of the realization that they're not going to get access to the 25,000. And there's still a lot of those people that are first home buyers that are sort of banking on the 25,000. And so if that doesn't come through for them, then obviously it's a pointless exercise.
Well, that's right. We could see a whole bunch of land tied up and then become untied.
Totally.
So, that will make an interesting time. And of course, then, like most government things, they usually start something and then come to end it, and they find it's a bit hard to end it. So there is the potential, although no guarantee, of extending it. But I can see that they're going to find it a bit messy, and they might have to reassess that situation as the time comes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
my
that
other
will be
concern,
interesting.
my other concern is what may happen is, even if there's registered land, some of these building companies might literally sign a contract with a client, agree to be able to get on site within 3 months, literally race around pouring all these slabs just so they've got a start, and then not being able to get back to the site for a couple of months. So, a build time will blow out because they're running around trying to get all these starts in order to get all these people into their $25,000 grants.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, that's always the risk. I mean, there's only a certain number of builders that work on a certain number of jobs, a certain number of time, and if all of a sudden there's an influx, straight away time's going to blow out no matter what. But
Absolutely.
if the opportunity is there, right, because it's not just 25,000. I mean, if you are a first homeowner in some of these states, you can actually score pretty well, mate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just here in Queensland, obviously in my local market, so they've got your 15,000 if you're a first home buyer, and then plus the additional 25 if you're building a new home. But like the 15,000 is for a new home build as well. But if you're a first home buyer, you get the 15 plus the 25. And then, the Queensland state government announced recently, I think it was an extra $5,000 in some regional areas. So, just here in Queensland, there's 45,000. I think the WA government's matching the 15 and the 25 with another 20. So that's $60,000. You sort of, as much as that's great if you're on the receiving end of that, you sort of got to question where that comes back into the market or how that comes back and affects the market.
Well, this is the issue. I mean, we did calculations, that you and I did calculations in one of our early podcasts talking about the old homeowners grant, which was 7 and 15 or something. And my argument was that back then, what it did was it didn't increase the price of property by 7 or 15,000. Because most of those buyers were sort of leveraging with a 90% loan and a 10% deposit. It made the property price could jump quite a lot, almost not exponentially, but quite substantially based on their leverage. So it wasn't that a property was 150 and then went to 157. It was like, well, we could sell at 200 now because really, we only need an extra 5,000 in deposit to do that because we're getting a 90% loan. And, I'm not saying that we're going to see that because obviously we've had the COVID event and the wages and all that sort of stuff are questionable. The banks are being very, let's just say fine-tooth comb and rubber glove is probably what a lot of banks are looking at right now when you go for an application. But it's still throwing a lot of money into the market in terms of, the end price of property.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I think, I'm sorry if it takes away from the point that you're trying to make there, but, I think you add into that, like for anybody that understands Phil Anderson's clock and what we've just spoken about, the idea of what's going to happen in the markets, based on that for the next, say, 5-6 years, a lot of people are quizzing me about how can that be possible? Like property prices are at this, in their mind, this extreme point of unaffordability at the moment. But what you've got to remember from COVID and what COVID has done is COVID has introduced, governments right around the world are printing trillions of dollars worth of extra money. So all of that money has to filter back to the banks. And there's only one way that banks make a profit, and that's to lend that money out. And there's only one place I want to lend it, and that's with the residential security. So, again, you go back to the 2000s after September 11 and this back into the cycle that we're entering into. What is about to occur is right now the banks are going through things with a fine-tooth comb. When that trillions of dollars of money filters back into the banking system, then lending policies will loosen up. So this will take us back to, I remember I bought a property in 2005. I borrowed $980,000 on a no-doc loan. I simply signed a one-page stat deck to say, yes, I can afford the loan.
Yep.
And so, so we're going back into that cycle where policies will loosen up. Everybody's forgotten about the Royal Commission. The government made announcements after the Banking Royal Commission that there were strict policies that have applied to the banks. Since COVID, they've actually detracted those. So I was reading an article on that yesterday. So banking policies will loosen up over the next couple of years, and we'll get back to that low doc, no doc scenario, plus all this trillions of dollars worth of money, and it'll just fuel the next cycle.
Look, what I can say for certain is that the you know, the downturn always sets you up for the next boom, right? And this is what happens in these markets. In terms of the information going around, though, I definitely feel like we're all on the USA 24-hour news cycle right now, because it's just the next event, the next event, the next thing that comes and fills your inbox or your Apple News or whatever it is. Mate, it's never ending. So, I mean, there's always something else to be kind of taking your focus from. If you can take a step back and have a look at history and how things work and what happened at certain events. I mean, nothing's ever exactly the same, but there's always key indicators of what goes on. Totally. And, you know, you'd be pretty wise to look at that. We always talk about in our monthly update also our Xenium Action Compass, which is just a really great way to look at those markets that we showed on the HW clock. So anything in a rising market or you know, a boom sort of stage, or then you can look at sort of making money out of property on that and creating property. And then you got the others down the bottom that are in a falling market where you go in for a discount. So that's always good to check back at what you want to do and where you want to do it on those two things. So if you look at the HCW clock and it tells you this suburb looks good, and you look at where it is, then you place it, overlay it on our action compass, and it will tell you what you should be looking to do in that suburb. So that's always something that to keep in mind in this time. Mate, with the grants, it also comes, like, they're not on existing property, right? But the stories that you've been telling me, that hasn't seemed to matter much to you.
No, not at all. No, and again, this is, you know, I've got to try and keep in mind that obviously, potentially, you've got watchers and listeners right around the country, but you know, here on the Sunshine Coast, things have been really busy for 2020. You know, like, I mean, for me personally, what are we, like, 26th of June, and I'm literally 3 sales away from my best ever year in real estate, and I've been doing this 9 years now. So it has been, 2020 has just been flat out all year. And really didn't slow down through the COVID. April was a quieter month. I think I sold 3 properties in April. But other than that, you know, my last 16 listings, 8 of them didn't even make it to the market. Of the 8 that made it to the market, 5 sold on the first day of inspections. So yeah, look, we haven't lost momentum at all. You know, we came into the 2020 January, February with great confidence in the market. We had a really good finish to last year, and so that rolled into the new year with really good confidence. Had the best January ever by a mile. And so when COVID hit, yes, things slowed down. Yes, there was less buyers around, but it really just took the tire kickers out of the market. People still need a home to live in. You know, the market just rolled on.
So you're mainly still, like the home owners grant, you're still dealing with homeowners? It's not so much investors?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I haven't. Gosh, I can't remember the last time I sold a house to an investor.
There you go. Well, that's the strong investment market on the Sunshine Coast. That's
Well, and again, I think that sometimes that's a little bit reflective of the pricing. You know, is the market was so busy that investors felt like they, a bit like the clock you were showing before, the HTW clock. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe some investors just felt like we're approaching the peak of the market. Probably I'll tell you what, the one thing that hasn't stopped, which has been a real constant in the last couple of years, is investors looking for duplex sites. Up until the start of 2020, for the last 2 years in particular, I would have said that 60 to 70% of my land inquiry was investors looking for a duplex block.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a strategy we definitely talk about with our clients. It's a pretty good one, right? I mean, if you want to know more about that, hit us up, because while they're hard to find, when you find them, they're a good little thing.
Oh, look, I think in terms of residential property people, and when I say people, not necessarily investors, but people looking to, say, do a reno versus build a speccey or whatever it may be, if there's a window of opportunity in terms of making money in the residential market, it's definitely building a duplex if you can get your hands on a site. Yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because the sites are getting a bit hard to, well, I mean, obviously land's hard to come past, but it's hard to get the right duplex site a lot of times.
It is. I think now's a really good time for investors just to be a little bit left field with their thinking with that, and maybe like again we use the Sunshine Coast as an example, where it's quite difficult to find a duplex site at the moment. But go to somewhere like Maroochydore, where you've got the new CBD zoning, find an older house on a good sized block with the right side access, and turn it into a duplex. Alternatively, find the right location with the wrong house, so to speak, and just knock it over and start again. And that'll be a worthwhile long-term strategy.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Well, mate, that's for me for the data. I didn't really want to go through too much else. We're waiting for our this quarter's data to come out. So that'll be May.
Sorry, that just reminds me. So one key point with the busyness of 2020, which we probably didn't touch on, is it just comes down to supply and demand, Scotty. So realestate.com tell us that listings this year, by comparison to the same time last year, are down somewhere between 35 and 38%. That's a lot of real estate that's not on the market.
Okay, so there's not on. I mean, I look at that, but then the buyer inquiries. What's the buyer inquiries been like?
Well, again, as I said before, the only buyers that have left the market are just the tire kickers. So there's still a significant number of buyers getting around. So the demand hasn't really changed, but the supply has dropped significantly, which is why the prices have held firm through what's deemed to be a slowing period.
Yeah, and I would suggest that there's a good portion of those properties that aren't listed were probably, just tire kicker listers anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the one. That's certainly one thing that we've seen. There's a lot of people that are unsure about what the next move is. Obviously, have just held back from listing for that reason. Particularly if you're upsizing, because obviously you're going from a mouthful to two mouthfuls, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, as I was saying, we're really waiting for that April, May, June data to come out, because I think that's going to be super pertinent to where our next quarter is going to be, going. The quarter data that come out now is January, February, March, and it was kind of like pre-COVID. But it would be really interesting to see what happens in this quarter. And I think, as you're saying, it's probably going to be heavily underpinned with owner-occs. And as you've seen personally, the sales numbers haven't dropped. But there's plenty of areas that have, but there's obviously, in your case, plenty of areas that haven't as well.
Well, probably more so. It might, again, I guess it's in times like this that people that have been in the industry, like myself, for 9 or 10 years or longer, probably get a greater percentage of the listings because of the trust factor that comes in those periods. But so I don't think I think there may well be a drop in sales in the data. But again, what there won't be a drop in is the sale prices or the discounts that are given by sellers because they haven't had to discount because of the demand from the buyers.
That's crazy, isn't it? Well, I think that it'd be very interesting to see what happens with this government grant and all the land that has been, sold.
Yes.
And what happens in the coming months. We could be going around picking up some good land. But, I'd really like to reiterate to everyone, looking at that clock and those cycles, remembering where the last mid-cycle slowdown was and what that looked like during and after. Okay, because when we're in these times, we always go, it's the end of the world, we're never going to get out of it. Whereas in reality, as I said before, these are the times that set up for the next sort of upwards cycle. And it's always good to remember. Mate, anything else that you've got to share with us today before we close off?
No, mate. No, all good.
Mate, that's good. Well, it's been a pleasure having you back on after all this time. My original podcast partner, Jason Stock. If you want to know any more about what we've talked about today, hit us up. We've had it scrolling at the bottom of the screen, our website and email address. And for those listening to Xenium Live on the podcast, it is hello@xenium.property. So hello@xenium.property, no .coms, no .aus. Or you can give us a call anytime on the phone number 1300 66 7789. Jason, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome, mate. Thanks for having me.
I'm Scotty North. This is Xenium Live, and we'll see you again soon.